inches from the end. One eye, is it just the right eye?
Yeah.
Just the right eye is gone. There's also some sort of opening to the...
Have you got that, Phil?
Yeah. Hang on. As we've viewed this, clean incision. Yeah, clean incision there above the right thigh, hindquarter, into the rectal area. All the rectal area is surgically, the whole cavity is totally empty. Yeah, totally empty. Obvious inaccessibility by road to this area.
David Caton reports on a case from the Severn estuary where a large number of sheep were mutilated.
There was reports initially of 40 injured animals, 16 dead. This happened on...
And the location is on the Severn estuary, on the Forest of Dean side. So you're on the northern side of the estuary between Lydney and Chepstow. And across the river, just a mile and a quarter direct, is the Albury-on-Severn nuclear power station, which I think might be interesting, because the farmer just threw in sort of a conversation that local people around him had been notified that they were soon to be dished out iodine tablets, which suggests there'd been a sort of radiation leak from the power station, which could affect people, you know, and lower your red corpuscle count and all the rest of it, which is disturbing in itself. But, so he brought them in from this location about 2 miles away, because the farmers rent fields out to each other. So the field where it was, which was like between the estuary, which is tidal there, there was a railway track. So it was like a 300-yard wide strip, about 3/4 of a mile long, and that was the field contained by the river. So the only access was off two other farmers' fields to cross the railway crossing to get onto that strip of land. And that's where he found them after a night of torrential rain. So it was boggy, windy. The farmer, Willie Guest, said, "I wouldn't like to have been out there." So the suspicion was, and this was reported on the television news from Bristol, that some people with firearms and dogs possibly had walked up the railway track, gone into the field, somehow herded the animals together. This is in the dark, mind you, in a wet, horrendous night, and shot with a low caliber rifle the animals in the heads, which turned out to be absolute nonsense. But because the police were informed, they were duty obliged, I suppose, to follow up this line of inquiry, because firearms had been suggested to be used. So the RSPCA attended, apparently, a big cat expert, a fellow called Danny Bamping from the British Big Cat Society, who declared, so the farmer told me, to the TV camera people, crew who were there, that it was not the work of big cats, and he disappeared. The RSPCA were mystified and were more interested in making a plug for the public watching the TV news to get funds for the RSPCA, which is what they do. So the farmer was absolutely fuming about it because he's lost all his animals with no real explanation. So the CID came back in, we happened to meet two of them, and a vet from a practice in Chepstow, a lady called Jane Glover Hill, appeared, armed with a big knife, to detach the heads of 4 of the animals and take a whole one, which I helped her in the car boot with, back to the veterinary practice to conduct some radiography on the heads to look for evidence of lead shot.
Right.
And
was there any evidence of lead shot?
No, absolutely none at all. Clean as a whistle.
Did these have any of the mutilation signs? Any of the 14?
No, yes, in a sense. When I heard of this, I rang the TV people in Bristol, who gave me the name of the farmer. So I rang him, said I'm in Manchester, 200 miles odd away, and said, "Did any of the animals in this big heap on his tractor
Yeah.
have a jaw strip.
Yeah.
And he said, oh yes, I think you're right, they did, it did. So I said, can you go and check to see if the tongue is missing?
Right.
So he said, oh, okay. So he put the phone down, and after about, I don't know, half an hour, he came back on the phone to me and said, absolutely amazed, he said, you're right, the tongue's missing. So he thought, how do I know, 200 miles away, I haven't clapped eyes on these animals,
Yeah.
know that the tongue was missing, you know, because you've got to force the jaw open to see that, because rigor mortis starts to set in,
Yeah.
which makes it hard to open the jaw. So he was really intrigued. So that was enough. She invited me and Robert to go back with him to Chepstow before we headed back up north, while they did some of the radiography. So and that proved that firearms were not used categorically. But she found some very interesting wounds, and these were crushing injuries, lots of them on the head and the jaw, and the nasal bone down the front of the animal was sort of splintered. There was no other damage elsewhere. There was no rectal coring, no other body parts affected. It was all the head and the neck.
So it seems that sometimes they're just interested in the head end, and did they take the soft tissue organs from the throat and
No.
and the esophagus?
No.
So, okay.
There was neat shallow holes, one under the jaw in the centre, one of the sheep. They all had a mixture. I mean, some had no injury at all, but the farmer said often they're stressed. Sheep are very prone to dropping dead with a heart attack.
Right.
So something stressed them out. This is the jaw strip, which is similar but different in some respects to the other animals elsewhere. But we found holes behind the ears. When you pull the ears back, there were these holes in the skin which had some depth. And then across there was a particular black one, which I'll turn to, this one, which had a diagonal strip of the tongue, there and there, and then little holes in the side of the face.
Yeah.
And then by accident, by pulling the carcass about,
Yes.
which I found there was a split between the ears across the crop of the skull, which looked like a neat cut, but when I pulled the skin back, it revealed, I think, the top of the cranium.
Right.
And the side under the ears, these larger holes, there was a smaller hole in the centre, or not necessarily in the centre, but within this hole.
Right.
Now, this photograph with the head detached, Jane Glover Hill discovered, with dissection I guess eventually, that these two holes were in the side of the head, a bit similar to the lamb from Shropshire, but deeper, within the bigger hole.
Right.
And she found they seemed to line up, and she actually passed an implement through from one side to the other, which was a knitting needle actually, which she suggested a clamping device had been forcibly, and a lot of force, she said, would have been applied to press these two appeared to be blind holes, but diametrically opposite each side of the head. And then this had missed the top of the brain that came out the other side. Albeit, she did say, in death, the brain shrinks a modicum, which leaves a bit of a gap between the brain and the top of the skull, if you see what I mean. But that clearly was not done by a bullet. The main thrust of it was to eliminate firearms, and that's really all they were interested in doing. That was the veterinary practice's brief, to eliminate the firearms. And once that was done, the police lost interest. The case was closed. So nobody had any answer to it, basically. And farmers have said to me more than once, for you to catch an animal, particularly in a herd, I mean, they have difficulty getting one to give it some treatment, you know, an injection or something, or do something to its foot, you know. And that's why they say we have sheepdogs to help us do it.
Yeah.
Now, to round them up, they herd them into a small area where they were found. There's some pictures taken by the big cat mine, which I've got from the farmer, shows like where they were laying, absolutely covered in mud and slime. You know, they were a mess. So that you can imagine the pitch dark, in the rain, terrible rain, wind blowing a gale, the sheep would be jostling about to be able to go in there with a firearm, with a rifle of some sort, to keep them steady, to fire weapons into the heads of these animals would be ridiculous, if not impossible. And apart from endangering yourself, shooting yourself literally in the foot in the process.
Another peculiar fact of this phenomena is that it is not just farm animals that are at risk. Wild animals, birds and sea animals are also victims.
Evidence is showing that it's all wildlife generally, from small animals, even mice, hedgehogs. I've got a picture of a hole in the centre of a hedgehog, which you might like to look at. So the wild animal, including the fox and the badger, who are both predators to lambs, for example, also fall victim to this sort of mutilation. So you've got the whole
animals?
Domestic animals, cats, dogs, rabbits. But then it goes up all the other way to cattle, to bison, for example, in Canada, elk, deer up in Scandinavia, even to sea mammals like dolphins,
Seals?
Seals, yes, yes, seals. There was a case in Orkney a few years ago, which Tony Dodd told me about, where the decapitated seals were found on Orkney beaches, completely bloodless. Mind you, the sea would have possibly washed the blood away, but they were all decapitated cleanly through the same IV joint in the vertebrae.
Right.
Now you imagine when people postulating that it was people with a big hatchet or a saw or something, you've got a seal on the beach, assuming you've got to catch a seal in the first place.
Yes.
How do you blind, without real-time radiography, imaging of some sort, see where to position your blade to cut through thick blubber the seals have around the neck to hit the same joint in the vertebrae? Not once, but a dozen or more times.
I was interested to find out more about this problem worldwide, so I telephoned investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe in the US, who has spent years looking into the animal mutilation phenomena.
Hi Linda, this is Richard Hall here.
Yes.
How are you?
Good.
Good. As you know, I've been investigating the phenomena of animal mutilation here in the UK, and David Caton mentioned your name when I interviewed him, and I thought it would be good to get a perspective of somebody who's investigated this from another country. When did you first become aware of the mutilation phenomena?
I was director of special projects for the CBS television station in Denver, Colorado, and the summer of 1979, I was working on a particular documentary for the station because that was my role as director of special projects. I had an audio guy who had just come off of a TV production for the brand new ABC Network 2020 program that was just starting then. And he said, I've just done a show in which they shot over 100,000 feet of double system film about unusual animal deaths in which there are no tracks, there's no blood. He was going through, an ear is missing, the eye is missing, the tongue is missing, jaw flesh is missing, udder or testicles and penis are removed, and the rectum is cored out, and the vaginal tissue is taken. All of this happening in many places in the United States. And I only had a glancing knowledge about this from newspaper headlines. And now I'm talking to my audio guy who had come off of an ABC network shoot. I said, well, when are they going to air this? And he said, I don't know. So I called, as director of special projects for the CBS station, ABC in New York, explained who I was, that Mark O'Kane was working for me. When were they going to air this network program about animal mutilation? And the executive producer I was talking to, this would have been like around August of 1979, said, oh, we scrapped that because we're in the business of news and we could never come up with an answer.
Okay.
And that really got my attention. I immediately turned my attention to starting phone calls with sheriffs. And I went to see a sheriff who had retired up in northern Colorado. And for an entire day, he told me about the incredible experiences that he had had investigating so many animal mutilations between 1973 and when he retired in 1979 that he said often in the year of 1975 we were going to 3 cattle mutilations a day. The bodies were warm to touch. They were so fresh, and yet it was exactly the same M.O. Ear missing, eye missing, circle of flesh taken around the eye, half of the jaw flesh usually, or all of the jaw flesh, the tongue removed deep within the throat, the genitals, male or female, removed, and that was the standard description of what law enforcement called animal mutilation. That is not my term, that is law enforcement term. That was being reported around the world from at least the 1960s, if not earlier.
In almost every case, the meat of the carcass, which a poacher would be most interested in, is left behind. It is the soft tissue organs which are taken.
They seem to go for the digestive tract and the rectal area,
Soft tissue
the
organs.
soft tissue. So they're studying what's happening to the food they're ingesting. You know, they're eating the grass in the field, which is either contaminated maybe by pesticides, chemicals, airborne pollutants like radiation fallout, for example.
Tissue that's removed is not really anything that's beneficial to a predator. It's not a meat or some sort of food that's going to be actually eaten for sustenance. So something else is taking these parts of the animals for another reason. So, and we have consulted with people in the National Health and with surgeons and people who actually study different diseases. And we ask them, why would you be looking, or anybody be looking for certain soft tissues, for instance, the part of the tongue or the part of the throat, in as much like the tonsils. We draw a connection to the sampling of BSE, in as much with BSE, there was a concentration of that agent within the spinal column, the tonsils, and bone marrow. And what we're told by people we ask in the National Health is that it's like somebody is or something is looking for something within the animal, and they're looking in these particular